Do you know what is one of the biggest illusions in material history? You were told that silver is just cheap gold, a substitute, a secondary choice, a method people bought when they couldn't afford the real thing. But it is this idea one of the biggest illusions in material history. Because gold was designed to sleep. Gold sits in vaults, gold hides in crowns. Gold is hoarded, polished, admired, and locked away. Across history, gold has been a symbol of power. But silver, throughout history, silver has been unfairly branded as the runner-up, the second best, the poor man's gold. We have completely misunderstood what this element actually is. Here is the truth. Silver is power in motion. Silver doesn't just represent wealth, it creates it. If gold is a king on a throne, silver is the engine under the city. And here is the thesis for this story, the core truth of the age of the matter. Gold was built to be stored in king's treasuries, but silver was built to move the world. It is not a sleeping treasure, it is a working metal. It was silver that made empires trade, silver that built global markets, silver that turned distant kingdoms into a single financial system. And that is not ancient history. The device you are using right now to watch this video, whether it's a smartphone, a laptop, or a tablet, it is not alive because of gold. It is alive because of silver. Every time you swipe your screen, every time you turn on your light switch, every time a solar panel captures a photon from the sun, and every time a guided missile finds its targets with terrifying precision, you are relying on silver. Modern civilization runs on silver, not because it's pretty, because it's functional. It is uniquely capable. In the material world, there are metals that are strong, metals that are light, that resist corrosion, that store energy. But there is only one metal that sits at the intersections of three critical powers: electricity, heat, and chemistry. Silver is the best electrical conductor among all metals. It is one of the best thermal conductors, and it has chemical properties that make it irreplaceable in key technologies. So when people say silver is cheap gold, they are just missing the point entirely. Silver is not gold's little brother, it's an entirely different species. Gold is a symbol of wealth, while silver is a tool of civilization. Now let's make this more concrete. If all the gold in the world suddenly vanished today, the financial markets would panic, yes, but the life would go on. But if silver were to disappear, the screens would go black, the grid would fail, the medical industry would lose a critical line of defense, the technological age will simply grind to a halt. And then you will notice something terrifying. The future has stopped arriving. Because silver is one of those materials that doesn't just enable modern life, it defines its speed. It decides how quickly energy can move through systems, how efficiently machines can communicate, how much power can be transferred, lost, or saved. Silver is a silent performance limit of the modern world. And the most dangerous part, most people don't even know they depend on it. We were raised to think the world runs on oil, steel, silicon. And yes, of course they matter deeply. But silver is everywhere inside that system, like a hidden nervous network. In the contracts, the switches, the connectors. In the pathways where electricity must pass with near zero resistance. In the places where heat must be pulled away before a circuit fails. In the tiny parts that most people never see, but everything depends on it. In this episode, we are going to follow silver across time, from its cosmic origins to the first mines that carved it out of mountains, to the empires that used it to buy the world, to the modern economy where silver is no longer just currency, but circuitry. And at the end, we will ask the uncomfortable questions no one wants to face. What happens when the world's working metal starts running out? But first, to understand the silver's true power, we will discover the hidden truth behind it. Welcome to the story of the metal that actually makes the world turn. Welcome to the Age of Silver. Chapter 2: The Hidden Front. Silver is often seen as the second prize. It is the consolation medal at the Olympics, the cheaper ring you buy when you can't afford platinum, or merely a shiny object to decorate a dinner table. We have been conditioned to see it as nothing more than a lower tier luxury, but the hidden truth is this. Silver's real identity has almost nothing to do with ornament. Silver is not primarily a metal of beauty, it is a metal of performance. To a physicist or an engineer, silver is not luxury at all, it's a miracle. Because among all the elements on the periodic table, silver holds a crown that almost no one talks about. It is the best conductor of electricity and one of the best conductors of heat. In the world of physics, silver is the path of least resistance. It allows electrons to flow with a freedom that other metals can only dream of. If cost were no object, our entire electrical grid would be built of silver. Our computers would be faster, our energy transmission would be nearly perfect, and our waste will be minimal. We don't use it everywhere simply because it's too rare, but where performance is non-negotiable, silver is the only option. Silver is the invisible hero of modern technology, not because we love it, but because physics does. And silver's role doesn't stop at circuits. It shows up in places that feel almost magical because they are so far from the stereotype. For example, mirrors. When you look into a mirror, you think you are seeing glass, but you are not. You are seeing a microscopic layer of metal behind the glass, a layer designed to reflect light with maximum efficiency. And historically, that layer was often silver. This is not an accident. Silver has exceptional reflectability, which means it doesn't just carry electricity, it controls light. So even something as ordinary as a mirror carries a quiet message. Silver is not a decoration, it's an optical technology. Now consider something else, something that shaped how humanity remembers itself, photography. Before the digital age, the world stored its memories on film, family photos, war footage, the first images of the moon, the visual records of the 20th century. And that film was built around the chemistry that depended on silver compounds. It wasn't art, it was material science. Silver turned light into information. And then there is a third domain where silver acts like a hidden force, medicine. Long before antibiotics, people noticed something strange. Water stored in the silver containers stayed fresher. Wounds treated with silver seemed to resist infection. Silver slowed decay. For centuries, it looked like a mystery, but today we understand the core idea. Silver has antimicrobial properties. It disrupts bacteria in ways many materials cannot. So, silver appears in medical dressings, coatings, specialized tools, not because it's pretty, but because it fights life at the microbial level. Which is an unsettling thought if you zoom out. Silver can conduct electricity better than anything. It can reflect light with extreme efficiency. It can kill bacteria. This is not a secondary metal. This is a metal with rare combination of powers. But here is a twist. If silver is so powerful, why don't we see it the way we see oil, steel, or silicon? Because silver's role is rarely visible. We don't build skyscrapers out of it. We don't pour it into roads. We don't frame it as a fuel. Instead, we scatter it. We use it in layers, coatings, tiny contact points, microscopic traces. Silver is the kind of material you don't notice until it is missing, and that's why the world misunderstands it. And this brings us to the fundamental distinction that most people miss. When you hold a gold coin, you are holding a currency, a static store of value. But when you hold silver, you are holding a utility. You are holding the most indispensable industrial material mankind has ever found. It is the bridge between the physical world and the digital future. So if you remember only one sentence from this section, make it this. Gold is money, but silver is technology. Chapter 3: The Origin. Before silver could become the backbone of our technology, it has to be born in the most violent crucibles of the universe. Close your eyes for a second and picture the metal silver, not as a jewelry, not as a coin, not as something polished under museum lights. Picture it as stardust that survived catastrophe. Because silver, like gold, didn't begin on Earth, it began on violence. Not the violence of war, the violence of physics. For most of the universe's early life, there was no silver, no gold, no copper. The cosmos had hydrogen and helium, and little else. Everything heavier had to be manufactured atom by atom inside the stars, and then forged again in events so extreme they rewrite the periodic table. The key idea is simple, even if the process is not. To create heavy elements, nature needs a flood of neutrons, so intense that nuclei capture them faster than they can decay. That chain reaction is known as the rapid neutron capture process, the R process. And when does the R process happen? In the short list of the universe's most violent areas, neutron star merges and certain classes of core collapse supernovas, or other extreme stellar explosions. When two neutron stars collide, it is not just a cosmic crash, it's a nuclear factory, an event capable of producing large amounts of very heavy elements through the R process. So, silver is born in the same broad cosmic family as gold. Heavy element nucleosynthesis in catastrophic events that seed galaxies with rare atoms. Since both silver and gold are born through the same cosmic processes, they are siblings in a way. However, once they arrive here, silver behaved very differently than from gold. Gold is an introvert. It stays pure, resisting almost everything, waiting in riverbeds as shiny yellow nuggets to be easily found by lucky eyes. Silver, on the other hand, is very different. Silver is social, it's chemically reactive, it loves to bond with other elements, sulfur, chlorine, and especially lead. It hides itself inside dull, grey rocks disguised as common earth. This reactivity is why silver tarnishes, turning black as it reacts with the air. And it is this very trait that made silver the ultimate challenge for our ancestors. You couldn't just stumble upon silver, you had to liberate it. And that created a technological barrier so fundamental that it shaped the pace of civilization. You can't build a silver economy if you can't reliably separate silver from rock it lives in. This is where the story turns from cosmic origin to human ingenuity. Because the real revolution of early silver wasn't mining, it was metallurgy. In the ancient world, one of the breakthrough methods was cupellation, a refining process that sounds almost simple until you realize how advanced it was for its time. Cupellation is specifically used to separate silver from lead in silver lead metallurgy. Here is the principle. You take an alloy of silver and lead, often produced by smelting argentiferous lead ores, and you heat it under the conditions where oxygen can do its work. At high temperatures, lead oxidides. It becomes lead oxide, also called litharge. The silver doesn't oxidate in the same way, so it remains behind as metallic silver. This isn't just chemistry, this is control. It is the ability to manipulate matter with intention, using heat, airflow, and materials designed to absorb or separate the unwanted compounds. And historically, that mattered because cupellation became a gateway technology. For a long time, it was the principal way to retrieve silver from argentiferous leads. Archaeological evidence places early silver extraction and related processes in the Near East during the early Bronze Age, with finds that include silver, lead, and litharge, signatures that point towards the emergence of early silver lead metallurgy and refining methods. So when we say silver shaped civilization, we don't just mean it was valuable. We mean it demanded a higher technological level to unlock. And that sets up the next step in our narrative, the world before silver. Chapter 4, Before Silver. To understand the true impact of silver, we have to imagine a world paralyzed by friction. Before silver became the standard, the ancient world was not a global network. It was a fractured collection of isolated islands. Economies were small, local, and stagnant because they were trapped by limitations of barter. In other words, commerce existed, but it didn't circulate. And the reason wasn't a lack of ambition. People have always wanted what they didn't have. The desire was there. But the problem was friction. The primitive world suffered from one brutal limitation. Trade has no universal bloodstream. So early economies did what humans always do when systems don't exist. They improvised. They bartered. A sack of grain for a tool, a goat for a bundle of cloth, a jar of oil for a day of labor. And for small communities, that can function. But barter has a built-in ceiling. The moment societies grow beyond local scale, that ceiling becomes a wall. because barter demands a double coincidence of wants. You don't just need something, you need the other person also want what you have, and right now at the same time. If you have wheat and you want a knife, you must find a blacksmith who wants wheat today. And if blacksmith wants salt instead, trade collapses. That is the first limit of local trade, matching desires. And the second limit is even more dangerous, measuring volume. In a barter world, everything is negotiated every time. How many jars of oil is a horse worth? How many days of labor is a roof worth? How many fish equal a bronze pot? Every transaction becomes an argument, and arguments are expensive. They slow trade, they create mistrust, they reduce markets to small circles of familiarity. Now, you might think the solution would be obvious. Just use gold instead. But it's not that simple. Gold existed, of course, but it was useless for daily life. It was too rare and too valuable. Trying to buy a loaf of bread or a simple tunic with gold would be like to buy a cup of coffee today with a diamond. The value was just too high to be practical. Gold was not built for ordinary exchange, it was built for extraordinary storage, tributes, royal wealth, temple offerings, the concentrated power of elites. Gold could symbolize value, but it could not circulate as everyday economic blood. Then, what about copper? We could use that, but the problem with copper is that copper was more available, easier to work, more suited to common exchange. But the copper had the opposite problem. Copper was too low in value and too heavy to carry. To pay something meaningful, a large animal, a shipment of grain, a boot repair, you would need piles of copper. And here, weight becomes the tax. Volume becomes limitation. You can't build a long distance market if payment requires a cart. So the ancient world was trapped between two extremes. Gold was too concentrated, and copper was too diluted. One was a treasure that slept, and the other was a burden you had to drag. The world needed something between in the middle of these two, a portable unit of value, divisible, recognizable, and trustworthy. Something you could carry across borders and still have it mean the same thing. Because globalization didn't begin with ships, globalization begins with standardization. So the world waited, without knowing it, for the missing link. A metal voluble enough to matter, but common enough to circulate. A metal that could be divided into smaller units without losing trust. A metal that could be weighted and verified. A metal that could move. And this is where silver enters history like a solution to a mechanical problem. Because silver sits in the perfect middle ground, not too rare, not too common. Silver was the missing operating system for exchange. It became the unit that can travel. And when value can travel, something new becomes possible. Trade routes stop being occasional contacts and become permanent arteries. Because once you have a standard unit, you can do things barter cannot do, like collect taxes, create debts, pay wages, and most importantly, you can trade with strangers. This is the great leap. So when I say silver started globalization, I don't mean it created curiosity, I mean it created liquidity. It became the blood the world needed, something that could flow through markets and keep them alive. But before we move into the globalization part of the story, we first need to go to that moment when the supply of silver exploded and the balance of the world was thrown off. And this brings us to the part 5, the discovery. In every age of matter, there is a moment when a substance stops being valuable and becomes world changing. For silver, that moment has a name, Potosí. The year is 1545. Deep in the Bolivian Andes, the Spain conquerors came across a geological freak of nature. It was a mountain called Cerro Rico, the Rich Hill, but the locals would come to know it by a darker name, the mountain that eats man. This wasn't just a mine, it was a solid wall of silver rising into the sky. The sheer amount of wealth locked inside this rock was incomprehensible. A single point on the map that could move the entire world economy. But, of course, there is a but. But getting it out required a deadly innovation. The Spanish introduced a process using mercury, a toxic liquid metal, to extract the silver out of the ore. It was a chemical triumph, but a humanitarian catastrophe. Thousands of indigenous laborers were forced into the toxic dust, their lives spent fueling the extractions that white metal. That is why the mountain that eats man is not a metaphor, it's an accurate description of this extraction economy. And what do you think happened afterwards? What happens when a single empire suddenly gains access to a source so immense it seems almost infinite? At first, it looked like destiny. Spain's ships began to carry silver across Atlantic, massive quantities moving into Europe. And for a moment, Spain appears unstoppable. This is the classic illusion of resource empires. If you control the substance everyone wants, you assume you control the future. Spain funded armies, fought wars across Europe, projected power far beyond its population size. Silver became the empire's heartbeat. But now we come to the but part. But then the hidden mechanism of money reveals itself. Because when silver is money and silver supply explodes, money supplies explodes with it. And what happens when money supply explodes faster than goods and productivity? Prices rise. Not gradually, systematically. This is what historians often call the price revolution, a long wave of inflation across parts of Europe in the 16th century, as silver flowed in and the volume of money shifted. And here is the irony that should feel familiar today. Spain becomes rich, and yet Spain begins to weaken. And you may ask this, how you become rich and be weakened at the same time? How it's happening? It's happening because of economics. For the first time, people learn the hard lesson in economics. When money becomes too common, it loses its meaning. Spain drowned in its own wealth, creating an empire built on silver, but destabilized by the very thing they coveted. Silver makes everyone wealthier, but it doesn't automatically create food, more tools, or more productive capacity. So the empire starts spending money that is losing value. Imports rise, domestic industries struggle, debts accumulate. Silver becomes both the source of Spanish power and the slow poison inside its economic foundations. In other words, Potosí doesn't just change Spain, it changed the planet's circulation of value. And that brings us to the next question, because this is where the story gets even bigger. If Potosí turned silver into a global flood, where did that flood go? Who absorbed it? Who became dependent on it? And how did silver, born in cosmic violence and refined through human suffering, became the first true currency of globalization? And this is the exact point where we turn to the globalization chapter of our story. Chapter 6: The Silver and the Ship. If oil and the combustion engine defined 20th century, then silver and the sailing ship defined the 16th. This was the moment the world actually became round. Because a metal that can function as universal money is powerful, but it's still limited if it can't move. And for most of history, distance was the enemy of value. Roads were slow, caravans were vulnerable, oceans were barriers. Then in the late 1500s, humanity built a machine that changed the planet's circulation of wealth. Not a factory, not a stock exchange, a route, a floating pipeline, the Manila galleons. Every year, colossal Spanish ships left the Americas, often from Acapulco, crossed the Pacific and reached Manila in the Philippines. And what they carried, again and again, was the same substance, New World silver. Silver moving across an ocean in exchange for Asian goods, silks, porcelain, spices, luxury crafts. And Spain was not just selling silver, this was an arbitrage on planetary scale. Silver was worth more in Asia, particularly in China, than it was in the Americas. So the ocean itself became a profit engine. The ship wasn't just transportation, the ship was a price converter, a floating instrument that turned mining into a global purchasing power. Because for the first time in history, Asia, Europe, and the Americas were stitched into a single trade circuit, a loop of metal and merchandise that behaved like one integrated system. Silver left the mountains of Mexico and the Andes. It crossed oceans. It entered Asian markets. And Asian goods flowed back across the Pacific into the Americas, and onwards across the Atlantic into Europe. A triangle became a circle. And once trade became circular, you no longer have regional commerce, you have a world economy. But a global economy needs more than ships and demand. It needs a standard unit, something that everyone recognizes, trusts, and accepts without negotiation. That unit existed. It was stamped in silver. The piece of eight. The famous Spanish dollar, also known as the Real de Oco, a silver coin worth of 8 reals. This silver coin was the first global reserve currency, the ancestor of the United States dollar. In fact, if you look at the pillars wrapped in the ribbons of stamped on the back of those old Spanish coins, you will see the origin of the dollar sign we use today. This wasn't just Spanish money, it was world money. So when I say silver and the ship started the first globalization, I am not being poetic. I am describing a mechanical reality. Silver became the universal medium that strangers could trust. The ship became the circulatory system that moved that medium across the planet. And together, they fused the continents into one integrated network. But this also sets up the next escalation in our story. If China absorbed so much money that the Pacific became a permanent highway, what did that do to the Chinese economy, its taxes, markets, its power? Because once silver becomes the world's bloodstream, the next question is unavoidable. Who controls the flow? Who becomes dependent on it? And what happens when that flow surges or breaks? And that brings us to our next chapter, chapter 7, War Machine. Once a civilization builds its entire economic bloodstream around a single substance, that substance can become a trap. And China built a system for centuries that treated silver not as a luxury, but as a price of reality. By the late Ming dynasty, the state began communicating many taxes and obligations into a single payment in silver, a major fiscal shift often associated with the single whip reform. That decision revived the empire. Because once taxes are demanded in silver, silver stops being a commodity, it becomes survival. Farmers, merchants, and officials might trade in many things, but at the end of the chain, the state only wants one metal, silver. Silver mined in the mountains of Americas, minted and shipped, crossing oceans, then disappearing into the world's largest economy like water into the sand. This is why historians sometimes discover China as a silver sink, not because China was hoarding silver for vanity, but because the system absorbed it. It locked global trade into a strange dependency. If you wanted Chinese goods, you needed silver. And for Europeans, especially the British, that became an existential problem. Because Europe wanted China's outputs tea, silk, porcelain at a scale that turned desire into a national policy. But China, they wanted very little from Europe in return, which created a structural imbalance. Britain increasingly had to pay in silver. For the British Empire, this was a catastrophe. Their treasuries were bleeding dry. Every cup of tea in London meant silver leaving the vault, and most of the time, never to return. The trade imbalance was threatening the bankrupt of the most powerful nation on earth. The British needed a way to pry the silver back out of China, and they found it in the darkest commodity imaginable opium. Britain used the East India Company and some private merchants to push Indian grown opium into China illegally, and then demanded payment in silver, using that silver to finance the tea trade and other purchases. That is the moment the bloodstream flips. For generations, silver had been flowing into China, but as opium imports expanded, the balance moved against China in the 1830s, and silver began to flow out. What many later scholars described as a silver drain. And notice the cruelty of the mechanism. China's fiscal system is built on silver, so when silver begins leaving, the internal economy starts to seize. Taxes become harder to pay, prices distort, liquidity dries up. Pressure rises, not just politically, but socially. Then the crisis becomes visible on the surface. Addiction spreads, corruption deepens, and the state tries to clamp down. In 1839, Qing official Ling Zexu moved aggressively against the opium trade, seizing and destroying opium stocks. That enforcement, combined with the underlying trade conflicts, helped ignite the war that followed, the First Opium War, 1839 between 1842. This was not a war for territory, it was a war to control the flow of money. A war to keep global trade system running on terms favorable to Britain. A war to force open markets so that silver could be pulled back out of China and into the engines of another empire. That's why I call it a war machine. Because silver didn't fire cannons. Silver financed the logic that makes cannons inevitable. When you build an economy where one metal is the ultimate settlement, the world will eventually fight over who gets to direct that metal's current. And the Opium Wars proved something terrifying. Globalization doesn't only connect markets, it connects vulnerabilities. It creates dependencies so deep that when they snap, the result isn't just recession, it's an invasion. So the question for the next section becomes unavoidable. If silver was the bloodstream of the first global economy, and if empires were willing to poison an entire society to redirect its flow, shifts in its flow also shifted the map of power. Chapter 8, Map of Power. History loves ironies, and there is perhaps no greater irony in the economic history of the world than the fate of the Spanish Empire. Let's go back to the late 16th century. Picture the ports of Seville. It is the beating heart of Europe. Every few months, the horizon fills with the sails of the treasure fleet. These ships are sitting low in the water because they are heavy with the weights of the Andes. They are carrying silver, mountains of it. To the outside observer, Spain looks like the winner of the ultimate lottery. They have found the source of unlimited wealth. They have more money than all the European rivals combined. By all logic, Spain should have become the ruler of this world for the next thousands of years. But something strange began to happen, something that at the time no one could understand. I mentioned that earlier in the previous chapter, I will go deeper here. Despite this tsunami of silver crashing onto their shores, the Spanish people were becoming poorer. The cost of living was exploding. A loaf of bread that cost 1 real suddenly cost 10. A simple pair of shoes became a luxury item. Because flood of easy money creates a dangerous illusion that productivity no longer matters. Why build industries when treasures arrive by ships? Why invest in manufacturing when you can buy what you need from others? Why strengthen institutions when the next fleet is already on the horizon? This is the resource curse in its oldest form. What economists later called the Dutch disease is the same basics mechanism. External wealth floods in, the prices rise, and local production loses competitiveness. Imports become easier than building domestic capacity, and the economy reorganized itself around extraction and spending rather than innovation and making. Spain didn't have to use these words to leave the consequences. Silver turned into inflation, not overnight, but more like a long fever. Spain became the mouth of Europe. It received the food, chewed it, but the nourishment went to the rest of the body. The price revolution that followed didn't just cause inflation, it hollowed out the Spanish soul. It taught the world a harsh lesson we still forget today. A nation that makes nothing eventually possesses nothing, no matter how much money it prints or digs up. Silver gave Europe liquidity, but the most enduring winners were often those who built the infrastructure around it: trade networks, credit markets, maritime power, and capital discipline. So the map of power starts to shift. Now, if Spain represents one phase, wealth through a flood of metal, then America represents the next transformation. Because in the 1800s, silver didn't disappear, it returns, this time as a fuel for a new kind of expansion. In 1859, prospectors in Nevada struck something extraordinary: the Comstock Lode, one of the most famous silver discoveries in the US history. And it did more than create millionaires, it built the Wild West. The American West is often romanticized as a place of cowboys, outlaws, and gold panels sifting through rivers silt. But the real story of the West, the story that built the superpower we know today, isn't gold. It is the damned blue stuff. For years, gold prospectors in Nevada were frustrated by a sticky, heavy, bluish clay that clogged their equipment. They hated it. It made separating the gold impossible. They cursed it, shoveled it aside, and dumped it in piles as trash. But they were throwing away one of the largest fortunes in history. When a curious assayist finally tested that blue trash, the results were shocking. It was almost pure silver sulfite. They had been walking over the Comstock Lode, the largest silver deposit ever found in North America. This discovery didn't just trigger a rush, it triggered an industrial revolution. Unlike the placer gold of California, which a lone man with a pen could find, this silver was locked deep underground in complex quartz veins. You couldn't get it with a shovel, you needed science. You needed heavy machinery. You needed massive capital investments. The Comstock Lode turned the Wild West into a corporate machine. It birthed the concept of modern mining. To reach the silver thousands of feet down, engineers had to invent new ways to support the earth, creating the square set timbering methods that saved countless lives from cave-ins. They built massive stamp mills that roared 24 hours a day, shaking the ground for miles. And look at the consequences. The silver didn't flow through America like it did through Spain. It built America. It built San Francisco. The city went from a wooden frontier town to a metropolis of stone and steel, financed entirely by Nevada silver. The Silver Kings, the four Irishmen who controlled the mines, didn't just buy castles. They laid the transatlantic cables, they built railroads, they founded banks. Most crucially, this silver came at the precise moment that the United States was tearing itself apart. The Civil War was raging. The Union North needed desperately to fund its army to defeat the South. The billion from the Comstock Lode was the financial engine that kept the Union solvent. Abraham Lincoln himself admitted that without this silver, the war might have been lost. So, when you look at the map of power today, from the skyscrapers of San Francisco to the trading floors of Wall Street, you are looking at the legacy of the Comstock. Spain used silver to buy a temporary paradise and lost its empire. The United States used silver to build an industrial titan and gain the world. The metal was the same, the difference was what they did with it. And this brings us to our next chapter, chapter 9, Money and Silver. For nearly all of human civilization, money had two parents, gold and silver. This was a system known as bimetallism. It was a marriage of necessity. Gold handled the massive transactions between nations and kings, while silver handled the daily life of the common man. They worked in harmony. Isaac Newton himself, when he was the master of the Royal Mint, defined the ratio between them. It was a balance that kept the world economy stable. But in the late 19th century, a conspiracy began to brew in the dark corridors of power. A silent war was declared, and the casualty of this war was to be silver. Industrial economies grow, banking expands, international trades become faster, more interconnected, and suddenly the old two-metal balance starts to feel like a liability. When gold and silver prices shift on world markets, a bimetallic system can wobble. Governments began wanting a single anchor. In 1873, the United States Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1873, a major rewrite of mint laws. And one detail became explosive. The law made the monetary system effectively gold-centered by ending the standard silver dollar's place as a freely coined, primary legal tendered pillar. With the stroke of a pen, silver was demonetized. The government had effectively killed half of the money supply. When the public finally realized what happened, the outrage was explosive. They didn't call it an act or a law, they called it the crime of 73. But why was this a crime? Because this shift to a pure gold standard wasn't just an economic theory, it was a weapon of class warfare. You see, gold is rare, it's scarce, it's controlled by bankers and the elite. When you limit money only to gold, the money supply shrinks. This causes deflation, prices fall. Now, you might think falling prices sounds good, right? But if you are a farmer in the Midwest or a laborer with debt, deflation is a death sentence. It means the dollar you owe to the bank today is worth more than the dollar you borrowed yesterday. Your debt gets heavier, while the prices of your wheat or corn collapses. The crime of 73 enriched the creditors of Wall Street and strangled the debtors on Main Street. It turned the economy into a rigged game where the house always won. That are the banks holding gold. This ignited a popular firestorm that swept across America. The The cry was for free silver. The people wanted silver restored to its rightful place as money to break the stranglehold of gold. The United States tried particularly to pull back silver with promises like Brand-Ellison Act in 1978 and later the Sherman Silver Purchase Act 1890. Political attempts to revive or increase silver's role without fully returning to free silver coinage. But in the end, the gold standard prevailed. The bankers won. Silver was crushed, stripped of its title as money, and exiled from the financial system. And that brings us back to our theme. Gold is money, silver is technology. In the old world, silver was also money, sometimes the money. But after 1873, the direction has changed. So the next question becomes unavoidable here. When silver stops being society's everyday money, what does it become instead? This was the end of an era. Silver was no longer the currency of kings or the coin of the realm. It was forced into retirement. But as one door closed, the other opened. Silver stopped being money and started becoming something else. It was about to shed its identity as currency and be reborn as the most critical material of the industrial age. The bankers threw it away, but the scientists were about to pick it up. Chapter 10: Consumption Trap. There is a fundamental law of physics that says matter cannot be created or destroyed, only changed. But in economics, there is a frightening exception to this rule. We are witnessing the slow, systematic disappearance of a strategic element. We need to return to the comparison between the two noble metals one last time, because it reveals a terrifying truth about our future. Think about gold. Gold is immortal. Because it's so valuable and chemically inert, almost every ounce of gold ever mined in human history still exists today. The gold in your wedding ring might have once been a part of a Roman coin, or a chalice from a Mayan temple, or a bar in a Victorian bank. It changes shape, but it never leaves. We simply move it from one vault to another. The world's pile of gold grows larger every single year. But now look at the silver. Silver, on the other hand, is not immortal, it is being consumed. For the last 70 years, since the explosion of electronics industry, we have been taking silver out of the ground and scattering it into the wind. Unlike gold, which is hoarded in large bars, silver is used in microscopic amounts. It is dusted onto contacts, soldered into circuit boards, sprayed into mirrors, and woven into fabrics. And this is the trap. The amounts used in each individual device, your phone, your laptop, your microwave, are so tiny that they are often economically impossible to recycle. It costs more to extract 30 milligrams of silver from a discarded toaster than the silver itself is worth. So, what happens? We throw it away. We are literally burying our wealth. Billions of ounces of silver, the heritage of billions of years of stellar explosions, are currently rotting in landfill across the world. We are taking a finite, precious resource, turning it into a consumer trash, and mixing it with plastic and sludge, especially returning it to the earth in a form that we can never recover. This phenomenon creates a stark reality that few people talk about. The above ground stockpiles of silver are crashing. While gold inventories are at all time highs, silver inventories have been plummeting for decades. We are burning through the accumulated savings of history. But while the supply is vanishing, the hunger for it is becoming unstable. This is the consumption trap. We have built a civilization that is addicted to a metal that we treat like trash. We call it precious metal, yet we treat it like disposable plastic. We are walking a tightrope. On the one side, we have geological limits. Mines are getting deeper, ores are getting poorer, and production is plateauing. On the other side, we have an exponential technological demand that cannot function without this specific element. If gold is the money of the past, hiding in fear, silver is the martyr of the future, dying to give us our modern life. The question is not if we will run out of cheap silver. The question is, what happens to our technological civilization when the most essential metal in the periodic table becomes too rare to throw away? We are about to find out. And in the next part, we are going to connect this to the future. The electrification whale, the solar build-out, the hardware arms race. and the possibility that the first global metal of trade is now becoming the first global bottleneck of technology. Chapter 11: The Transition. For the last century, our civilization was defined by a liquid, black gold, oil. It was the master resource. Nations rose and fell based on the price of a barrel, and the internal consumption engine was the heartbeat of global economy. But now we are told the age of oil is ending. We are in the midst of a grid transition. Governments, corporations, and international accords are all pushing towards a singular vision, a world powered by the wind and the sun, a world where carbon emissions are a memory and transportation is silence and clean. It sounds like a utopia, but there is a dirty secret buried underneath this green dream. We often make the mistake of thinking that renewable energy means infinite energy. We think that because the sun shines forever and the winds blow freely, the energy they provide is free. But while the fuel, that are sunlight and the wind, are infinite, the machines we need to capture that fuel are very finite. And they are made of matter. To escape the trap of fossil fuels, humanity is walking directly into new kinds of dependency. We are trading the age of oil for the age of metals. And sitting at the very center of this new periodic table of power is, once again, silver. Let's look at the mathematics of the sun. When you look at a solar panel, you see a sheet of blue or black glass. But look closer. Do you see those thin metallic grid lines running across the surface? This is pure silver. Why silver? Because a solar panel is, in essence, a trap for photons. When sunlight hits the silicon cell, it knocks electrons loose. Those electrons need a highway to travel on to get out of the panel and into your home. That highway must be the most conductive material possible, with the lowest resistance, to ensure that no energy is lost as heat. This material is silver. There is no substitute that works as well. Engineers have tried copper, they have tried carbon nanotypes, but nothing beats the efficiency of silver. As we speak, the solar industry is consuming a staggering amounts of global silver supply. And this is just the beginning. We are not just putting panels on roofs anymore. We are building solar farms in the size of cities, in deserts across the world. The dream of a solar-powered Earth is literally paved with silver past. And then there is the car in your driveway. The transition from the gas engine to the electric motor is the biggest shift in transportation since the invention of the wheel. But an electric vehicle is a completely different beast from its petrol guzzling ancestor. A traditional car is a mechanical machine. It has pistons, valves, gears. An electrical car, on the other hand, is an electrical machine. It's a computer on wheels, powered by a massive battery pack. An internal combustion engine uses the modest amount of silver for basic electronics, but an electrical vehicle is a voracious consumer. It uses up to 3 times more silver than a gas car. Why? Because every silver connection in that high voltage system, every battery management sensor, every autonomous driving camera, and every changing port requires a contact that will not corrode and will not fail under high heat. And again, silver is the only answer. This creates a paradox that most policymakers are ignoring. We want to electrify everything. We want to replace over 1 million cars on the roads with the electric vehicles. We want to decarbonize the entire electrical grid. But by solving the carbon problem, we are creating a supply problem. The geology of the Earth doesn't care about our climate goals. We cannot simply print more silver like we print money. It takes 10 years to permit and build a new mine. Yet, the demand for green technology is growing exponentially right now. This is the green energy paradox. We are trying to build a sustainable future on a foundation of a depleting asset. We are shifting our addiction from a liquid that burns to a metal that conducts. So the question that keeps geologists and industry strategists awake at night is simple. Can the Earth provide enough silver to save the climate? Or will the green revolution hit a wall, not because we lack the technology and not because we lack the will, but simply because we ran out of the magic materials required to make it work? And this question brings us to our last chapter in our story, chapter 12, the conclusion. We have traveled a long way in the story, from the violent hearts of a dying star to the dark mines of Potosí, from the cargo holds of a Spanish galleon to high-tech clean rooms of Silicon Valley. And throughout this journey, we have seen one consistent truth: silver is a shapeshifter. For 5,000 years, it was money. It was the piece of eight, the denarius, the tailor. It was the trusted medium of exchange that allowed a farmer in China to trade with a merchant in Europe. It built the first global economy. Then, in 1873, it was cast aside. It was stripped of its crown, demonetized, and labeled as a relic of the past. The world decided gold was the only king, and silver was just a commoner. But that demotion was actually a disguise. While gold remained locked in the dark vaults of central banks, gathering dust, silver went to work. It reinvented itself. It became the backbone of the Industrial Revolution. It captured our memories on films. It connected our voices through telephone wires. And now it is the nervous system of the digital age and the lifeblood of a green future. So we have to ask ourselves a difficult question, a question that challenges the very definition of wealth. What is valuable? Is value determined by social agreement? Is something valuable simply because we say it is? That is the case with gold. We value gold because it's beautiful, rare, and useless. Its value comes from our collective belief that it's precious. If civilization collapses, gold remains shiny, but it does nothing. Or is value determined by utility, by necessity, by the undeniable fact that life as we know cannot function without it? This is the case with silver. We have spent centuries calling it the poor man's gold. We looked down on it because it was abundant, it was tarnished, because it was accessible to the common people. But in a world that is becoming more digital, more electrified, and more technologically complex every single day, the whole hierarchies of the periodic table are breaking down. We are entering an era where scarcity isn't just about how much of metal exists, it is about how much we need versus how much we have. Gold is a luxury. We want it, but we don't need it. Silver is a necessity. We need it, but we are running out of it. As the mines run dry and the landfill fill up with lost atoms of silver, as the demands for solar panels and electric vehicles outstrips the supply, we may witness a historical inversion. The poor man's gold might transform into rich man's copper, the most strategical resource on the planet. So next time you hold a silver coin in your hand, or you look at the reflection in a solar panel, or simply swipe the screen of your phone, remember what you are touching. You are not just touching a commodity, you are touching the bridge between the ancient world and the future. You are touching the metal that paid for empires, and the metal that will save the climate. Maybe it's time we stop comparing it to gold. Maybe it's time we realize that silver stands alone. It is the restless element, the working metal, the honest metal. And in the end, the market always reveals the truth. We might be approaching a day when the price of silver finally catches up to its value. And this has been the story of the second element. The age of gold is history. The age of silver is just beginning. Thank you for watching The Age of Matter. If you want to understand the invisible forces that shape our world, from the soils to the stars, make sure you are subscribed. We are just scratching the surface. I hope to see you in our next video that will be about another fascinating matter. Till then, take care.